Hello, and welcome to the Conscious Pause with Engy podcast. I am so glad that you're here. For our very first episode, I thought that we could spend time for me to share with you my life story and what led me down the path of wanting to become a life coach, a career coach, doing energy healing, and all of this side of living and conscious living that was not part of the roadmap that I had been on for the past almost 30 years. So I thought that would be helpful because my background is certainly not being a life coach and not working in energy. But when you hear my story, you will see why it all makes sense and how ultimately we all end up on the path that we're supposed to be. And that gives me tremendous courage as well as hope that regardless of how sideways things go sometimes, what's meant for us will never miss us. So my name is Engy. My maiden name, I don't know why I feel I need to tell you that, but my maiden name is Albacel. And so I grew up to Palestinian parents, Muslim Palestinian parents. And growing up, I always felt a little bit different. I always felt this sense that I didn't quite belong in the spaces that I was in, whether it was playing outside in the street with our neighbors or um, being at school or whatever I was doing, I always felt a little bit on the periphery of the things that I was involved in. And what I craved most since, for as long as I can remember, since grade school, is connectivity and to have this sense of belonging. And so I would spend the better part of my 20s and 30s searching for ways to belong. This is hitting different today. I spent the better part of my 20s and 30s looking, searching for belonging, for acceptance, um, wanting to be understood, to be deeply understood and seen. And so when you're when you're desperate for something, you often push it away. And the very thing you want becomes unattainable because you're clinging so tightly in wanting it. So it becomes the thing that evades you and the thing you continuously chase. And that was me. When I was little, I felt this deep sense that there is more than what we were seeing in front of us. I don't know where this came from. No one has certainly talked about anything like this in my home, in our household. My parents were not spiritual, they were religious, not religious, but they followed the protocols and the rituals of Islam. And my dad, I remember him going to um, the mosque on holidays, but not every day. Like we weren't religious. So my dad and my mom, they didn't pray every day in the house. They did fast during Ramadan. We celebrated Eid as children. Um, but we didn't talk about religion at home. We didn't talk about the meaning of religion. We knew, and growing up, we believed in God. We believed in the prophets. We believed in the principles of the religion. We were taught um, to be good, to be good people, to be honest, to live with integrity. Um, but we never talked about the deeper meaning of some of the teachings of the Quran or the teachings of anything else, right? And so when I started to feel that there was more to life than we could tangibly feel and see, I started to feel like there was no place to get those answers. I mean, as a child, you already sometimes feel different. And for me, I was already feeling different because I was also highly intuitive, and I was also very sensitive to people's emotions and feelings and energies around me, although I didn't have the words to describe any of those things. I just knew that I was sensitive. If somebody around me was upset and crying, I would be upset and crying. I would cry during movies. So I grew up in Israel until the age of 10, and then we moved to England and then to Gainesville, Florida, and then to Riverside, California, where I grew up, and we ended up making that our permanent home. And so every Friday night, there would be a new Egyptian movie that was released, or maybe it was whatever, every Friday night, it was a ritual in our home that we would all watch whatever the new movie or the new comedy that was being released. And my mom would make snacks and we would watch that. And when movies were sad, if there was a sad scene or a heartbreak or hardship, I would start crying, like really crying. And at the time, I was 6, 7, maybe 8 years old. And my younger brothers, I'm the oldest of three, and we're all about a year and a half apart. My younger brothers would tell my parents, like, Engie's crying. And my mom would just say, it's just a movie. Like, it's not a big deal. Why are you crying? It's just a movie. And so I started to feel that me crying because there was a sad scene was not a good thing, that it was a sign of weakness. It was not a good thing. And even though no one told me it was a bad thing, because I was different, because no one else was behaving in this way, because we didn't talk about anything to make my sensitivity feel like it was a valuable asset, it felt like a negative asset. And so as I started to grow up and get older, and we're now in the States, different moments in time would mirror back to me that my sensitivity was a downfall and that it was a weakness and it was a differentiator in a negative way. And so I started to shield how I was feeling from most people around me because I didn't want to be seen as weak. I didn't want to be seen as different. I wanted to belong. I wanted to be accepted. So along the path, right? So now growing up, I also became um, when you are the child of immigrants, which I was, and regardless of how you come to the country you're going to, whether you are going there for a job and you decide to stay, or whether you intend on moving your whole life to a place and immigrating, you are still, maybe this was just our family, an outsider seeking belonging in a place that is completely different than anything you've ever known. And so, in this quest for belonging and acceptance, sometimes people tend to overperform, over explain, um, people please. And so my parents, in their need to be accepted in this new country, in this place that they knew nothing about. They are both, my mom was born and raised in the West Bank. She was born in Jenin and ended up in her teen years moving to Nablus and grew up there. My dad was born in Jaffa, and he grew up there. And then he went abroad to Europe for his master's and PhD. But living in Israel or the West Bank is completely different than coming to a country where they're speaking a different language, where the customs are different, the culture is different, the food is different. You don't know anyone, you have no support system. And so those things make people, the family unit, closer because that's all you've got is just that family unit. It also makes you work harder in wanting to be seen in a positive light. And us being Palestinian, my parents were sensitive to the fact that we were the people that were hated by the world. So at the time, sorry, all kinds of things are coming up today. Um, at the time, this was 86, and Palestinians had a terrible reputation in the world, not of their own doing. Just people saw Palestinians and Arabs as terrorists, as those other people that come from the desert, even though like Palestine, Gaza, Israel, Egypt, they're all on the Mediterranean, right? It's not the middle of the desert. And lifestyle wise and weather wise, it's closer to California than it would be to a desert country. And yet they were seen as these desert people who wore turbans and rode camels. And it was a crazy stereotypes that I grew up hearing once we moved to the States. And so my parents were also aware of these stereotypes, and they worked really hard to be accepted and to perform in a way that came across as being productive members of society versus a burden, because they didn't want to be seen as a burden. They wanted to be seen as these are really nice people. They do good things. They are kind. They're generous. They're quiet. They don't cause any trouble. So they worked really hard to establish that, to do that. And so for me, seeing that, seeing them internalize how the world sees us and how they reacted to it, I also became an overperformer. I also became having this even more heightened need for belonging and connectivity and being understood. And on top of that, I also became a people pleaser because I didn't want to create negative ripples in any space that I was in. First, I was a people pleaser at home because I didn't want to add more stress to my parents, who I could sense were stressed about trying to assimilate and figure things out in a new country with no support system and no family. But then this translated into me becoming a people pleaser in life and with friends and with colleagues and in all situations. And this need to perform and belong, the more I desired it, the less I felt I had it. And on top of that, add the fact that now I am more intuitive, and I just don't know what to do with that. I am more sensitive to things before they happen, and I didn't know what to do with that. And didn't feel I could talk to my parents about that because they would just say, just don't think about it anymore, or think about something else, or whatever it was dismissed as not something to pay attention to. And yet it was a huge part of me in feeling that I can sense things around me even when I didn't have the words to describe what they were. I could sense shifts in people. I could sense events coming before they happen. I could, I was just sensitive to energy, and I just didn't have those words or that meaning or that knowledge in me at that time. And so my 20s and 30s, I started attracting situations and experiences and people into my life that would mirror back to me the lack of belonging, the lack of acceptance, the lack of being understood, being different, be that it's a bad thing. And so the more this happened, the more I started to believe that this was my reality. And the more I started to experience things in a different way than others around me. So back then, in my 20s and 30s, I didn't have the words for belief systems. I didn't have the knowledge about belief systems. I just knew that deep down, I felt like I wasn't enough. Deep down, I felt that no matter how much I accomplished, I could have done better. No matter how hard I tried, no matter how good something turned out, it could have been better. And, maybe there was moments in time when that feedback was shared with me and it stayed with me. And as I'm saying this, I'm remembering like, yes, there was likely feedback shared with me in a way that made me feel that my effort wasn't enough. And to me, that translated as I am not enough. I am I am in need to earn what is coming. I have to earn everything good that comes. It can't just easily come to me. I had to be worthy of it. And feeling not enough equals not worthy. And so you can imagine that what I was attracting would mirror back all of this and not worthy and not deserving. But in spite of the ups and downs, in spite of some of the very harsh lessons I learned along the way, and the really difficult, painful experiences I had along the way, especially in my career, um, somehow I maintained this optimism that everything was going to be okay. I don't know where this came from because there were times when nothing was okay, and there were times when things were incredibly difficult. And yet somehow I was always the girl who believed the glass is half full. I was always the girl who believed life is beautiful. There is so much to be grateful for. There is so much beauty around us. There's so much goodness around us. And so I held on to that even during really shitty times when a boss was bullying me, or another instance when one was sexually harassing me. I always maintained this belief and faith that I am looked after. I don't know from where, from who, but I felt this deep belief that God's got me and I'm not alone. in spite of the very difficult moments. And this belief likely saved me more than once, um, because I was always looking ahead. And in spite of the moment that I was in, I bounced back. I always got up and always got up with a smile. And I always got up ready for the next thing. And even when I was hurting on the inside, I didn't drag myself into that space for too long. I would be sad, I would be hurt, and then I would move on. And then something else would happen, and I would be sad and I would be heartbroken, and then I would move on. And so there was this interesting balance of weathering the storms while having this unshakable faith in God, the Creator, that I was looked after, even though there was nothing in my reality to make me feel that things were going to be okay or that someone was going to save me. I don't, or that I had a mentor or a guide or a spirit guide that I could sense around me. It's there's interesting things that happen to us in our journey. And when we find ourselves truly raw, truly honest, no ego, no pretending, just completely bare. And we ask ourselves the big question of, what is this all for? What am I meant to see? What am I meant to learn? Things start to show up to answer that call. And for me, that started to happen, and it kept happening. And even though I didn't fully understand the big picture of anything, I was given information based on my level of, um, now I know, consciousness. Back then, I didn't know any of that, but I just knew that I was given sparks of hope, sparks of, um, lifelines in different moments in time to keep me going, to show me something, even even though I didn't understand the big picture of anything. And I certainly didn't understand that there is consciousness and there's subconscious beliefs. And I didn't know any of this stuff even existed. And I wouldn't know it until, um, probably my mid to late 30s, in what is when I started to really open up in a different way. I remember at some point feeling, okay, God, show me. I'm ready. And I don't know what sparked that feeling of readiness, except to think back on some really challenging career points and the kinds of people that were around me and the relationships that I was in that left me feeling very, broken and very, sad at times, and feeling very, again, alone. Alone. That was the theme of, for as long as I could remember, feeling alone. And so they say, there's a beautiful saying, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And there's a continuation to that. When the student is really ready, the teacher disappears, because the real teacher, the master, is us. It's our inner wisdom. This episode is killing me. I don't know why. I thought I was ready to do this. Sorry, I'm going to get it together. Okay. So my first teachers appeared in the form of books, and I devoured them. The very first book I read was The Celestine Prophecy, and that opened my eyes to a different way of connecting with other things in this world that perhaps we see as non-living, non-interacting. Um, it gave me a different lens around synergies and synchronicities and understanding that there are no accidents in life and there are no coincidences in life. And the book had me pausing multiple times throughout reading it and feeling like it resonated in a much deeper way than I anticipated. And from there, other books started to fall in my lap. Um, what was after that? I think it was The Camino by Shirley MacLaine. That was mind blowing for me in understanding past lives and understanding the role that people play in our life and its connection to other lives we've had with that individual, and understanding karma and understanding life lessons and wisdom. And so I devoured that book. And after that, I read Women Who Run with the Wolves, and it got me to see deeper wisdom in, because if you've read any of those, they're all told through storytelling. They're not like curriculum books. So that was another eye-opening book. And from there, it was Many Lives, Many Masters. And that one is written by, I think he's either a psychiatrist or a psychologist. And he was interviewing people and um, doing hypnosis on people, and they would remember the different lives that they've had. And that was eye-opening for me because, again, growing up, I believed from my parents is that once you die, right? Death is final, death is the end. And so it's the life you have, and then it's the end, and that's it. But these books allowed me to see the universe and life and our physical existence in a much deeper way. And I began to understand that the soul lives on for eternity and that the soul actually experiences many lives and has many different spiritual contracts in all the lives it lives. And I started to understand what the significance is of these spiritual contracts that the soul carries and brings it into this life that that person is having, and how it shows up and how it comes about. I was always curious, right? So I knew I was different. I knew I was intuitive. And I knew I was curious about human behavior, how the mind works, how emotions work, how some people are able to process things one way and somebody else can process the same thing in a different way. I didn't have the language for any of this stuff, but I had the inquisitiveness and curiosity about all of it. And these books opened me up to see that my curiosity was taking me down a path of giving me answers that no one had given me before, that no one maybe in my life knew about before. And at this point, I started meeting um, different people that would come in and out of my life that were more spiritual, that were um, had a deeper level of understanding than the one I had at that moment in time. And again, I kept having experiences with different people. Some were positive, some were really negative. And each one of them would push me into something else. It wasn't easy. I would say that if I had to summarize my journey to getting to here, I would say it was pretty challenging because I was figuring things out on my own most of the time. And I would say that until I fully understood how the mind truly works and how our um, internalization of events around us truly works, I was kind of navigating things based on level of awareness and knowledge from that point in time, which looking back now was good, but not deep enough. And had I had a guide, a teacher, a person to collaborate with, to speak with, to answer the questions, I probably would have arrived here sooner and with more ease. But again, like we're on the journey we're on, and I am grateful for every bump in the road, for every high, for every low, because I don't know that I would have had this depth of knowledge to share with you had I not gone through the shit storms in my 20s and 30s and 40s, to be honest. Um, so I ended up continuously leaning in to things that piqued my curiosity. So if I started to feel I'm ready for next would appear. Sometimes it was a book, sometimes it was a person I worked with, sometimes it was a yoga class I would go to where the teacher would say something or recommend a book or recommend a different class. And I started to build my knowledge even more with all of those tools. And I started to trust that whatever I was meant to know was going to find me because that's how I was living my life. I also started to experience deeper meditation. And during meditation, I started to be able to pull things towards me that I wanted, that I desired. And again, I didn't have words for this. I just, so for example, I knew that I wanted to live in New York City. It was a dream of mine to actually go to NYU. And my parents said absolutely not because it was 3,000 miles away. And so I ended up going to a school not too far from where my parents lived. It was 45 minutes away. They felt good about that. It was okay. It ended up being a great experience, but I didn't go to NYU. But living in New York stayed with me. It stayed in my heart. And so in my 20s, at one point, I started to feel this tug again about going to New York. And I started to apply for jobs. Back then, we didn't have LinkedIn. Um, I think it was like Indeed.com or whatever the platform was. And I started to apply for jobs to different marketing agencies that were in the city, some that I had come across through my own work because I was already working in marketing in an agency. And sometimes depending on the job, I would be in-house. So throughout my career, I jogged back and forth between being in-house and then being on the agency side. And I liked both. And so I would come across a lot of people through both worlds. And so at this point, I wanted to be in New York, and I had known somebody that lived in New York. And I had said to him in passing, I would love to live in New York. And it stayed with him. Nothing came of that at first. And I was meditating, and I started to see myself walking down Fifth Avenue. And I would see myself grabbing a coffee from the local bodega and going to work. And I would see myself wearing flip-flops to walk and switching into my heels before going into the office. And the more I did that, and when I did that and I went deep into that meditation where it felt real, you could smell the air, you could hear the birds, you could hear the chatter of people talking. The next day, I would get a call from somebody in New York who had received my resume and wanted to schedule an interview. At that point, I hadn't resolved any of my belief systems about being enough, being accepted, being connected, none of that, right? I would go on these highs and lows and highs and lows. And depending on the moment, the situation, I would either be in this neutral state or something good would happen, and then come back down. The long and the short of it is, I didn't get the job from these interviews, but I felt in that moment that something is possible. Something that isn't currently in my world is possible. I could do something. I wasn't sure what I was doing, but I could sense that I was capable of pulling in something I wanted. I just didn't know the mechanics of it. A few years pass, or maybe a couple years pass. I don't remember how long, but it wasn't very long. I am now, I moved out of my apartment. I am living with a girlfriend, and I went back to school to become a child psychologist because, again, I'm feeling really pulled towards helping and towards being of service and understanding how the mind works and understanding the tools to offer somebody who is struggling with something, mentally and emotionally. So I started to go to school and I was living with my girlfriend. I was actually renting a room in her condo from her. And I was working full time during the day. And I get this call. And it was that friend of mine, that colleague from years ago. And he said to me, "Are you still interested in living in New York?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Great, let me connect you to the people who are hiring. And they're actually going to be in LA um, in the next, couple weeks. Maybe you could interview with them and meet them out there and then see what happens." And I said, "Done." And sure enough, I ended up meeting with them in LA, in downtown LA. We spent like hours together, having coffee, talking, laughing. I adored them and I knew I wanted to work with them. And within a month, I had the job and I was packing my stuff and I was moving to New York. And so now I'm feeling that there is magic in things, but again, not knowing the mechanics of them, but understanding that things can be changed, they're changeable. The reality around me can be changed. And I didn't have all the language for this. I just felt that I thought about New York enough. I could feel it in my bones. And every time I did, a call would come, an email would come, something would move forward. And even when I was interviewing for this job that I interviewed for in LA, I would hear Frank Sinatra's song, New York, New York, at the most random places. I would meet people in the coffee shop in line who happened to be from New York. There were different things that were happening that made me feel that New York was within reach for me, and yet nothing in my reality signaled to that, right? It was just like little signs. And I believe in signs. I've always believed in signs. I end up going to New York. I start the job. I'm loving life. I work on Fifth Avenue. And so the first day, taking the subway to work, I started crying because I couldn't believe that I actually was living in New York. Um, and a few weeks later, of arriving in New York, I turned 30. And the day of my birthday, um, I've never been a huge fan of my birthday. I just have never felt this attachment to my birthday. And on that day, I remember again crying, walking down Fifth Avenue, looking at the tall buildings and seeing the Empire State Building and just feeling so alive and feeling so happy and feeling so um, magnetic. That's how I felt, magnetic. Even though that wasn't the word I would have probably described, but I just felt like I was bouncing on clouds walking to work. I would end up going to another job. I almost said the word manifest, but I don't want to use trendy words with you. I just want to talk to you like it's like what was happening in that moment, even though that is exactly what I did. I started to feel that the job that I was currently in wasn't paying me enough. And when I started to ask around, and I know we're not supposed to ask what other people make, but somehow it became um, clear what other people at my level were making, and I was significantly underpaid. And so I went in and I asked for more money. And at the time, the VP said no. And he made me feel like it was a ridiculous thing to ask, and let's just revisit it. And when I told him that I knew what other people at my level were making and that I felt I was severely underpaid and that we should have a discussion, I was made to feel that um, I wasn't gonna get what I wanted, and we will just revisit it at a later time. Who knew when? So I started to imagine myself again, back to the meditation, back to the visualization at a different job. And at the time, there was a magazine that used to come out that we would get at the office, and it was called Event Marketer. And the magazine would highlight top marketing events that were happening in the industry. And they ranged from small to hundreds of thousands of people. And the companies that were profiled were also like it ranged from small agencies to ones that employed hundreds of thousands of people and budgets and just amazing things. And so I started to imagine myself being an employee of one of these types of companies that would do these spectacular events that allowed travel, that allowed um, a different lifestyle. Within a month, I had a different job at a company that was doing events, working with American Express. Um, and these events were exclusive to card members that were, um, you know, they were the team that I was on worked with small business owners, and the business owners ranged in category from like the black card all the way to the entry point card. And so the events and the experiences differed based on the level of the card. And I loved life. I thought, holy shit, I made this happen. And I loved the people and I loved the owner and my VP at the time. I couldn't believe it. And I was doing these high-end exclusive events at really difficult to get into restaurants and venues with these fabulous chefs and designers, and it was spectacular. As time went on, I started to feel that, again, it was time for me to move on. And again, I started to feel that I could bring forward what I wanted. And at this point, I was reading the book, The Secret. I had read many books now in between, but the book I was reading before I made this next jump was The Secret. And The Secret had me believing that if I believed it and felt it in my body, which I had already been doing, it was tangible. It was going to be real. And it gave me the language for what I had already experienced before, but this time I had tangible steps to follow. And so I wrote down the number of salary I wanted, and it was double what I was currently at the time making. And I went on this interview with this company, and I got the exact salary I had written down, the exact number, not a dollar more, not a dollar less. Because my belief systems were still wonky, still wasn't feeling I was enough, right? Still wasn't feeling I was worthy or deserving of any of this stuff. It felt amazing in the moment. I was able to pull things to me, but I was still feeling like, holy shit, I can't believe this is happening to me versus, of course, this is happening to me. I've busted my ass at every job I had. I earned this. I deserve this. There was a little bit of a disbelief that this was mine. Every job I had to fight for a higher salary, which I didn't get, right? So, like, while I'm sharing with you the highs and the awesomeness of being able to pull in what I wanted, I was leaving each place because I was underpaid. And I was leaving each place because I felt that I was not fully appreciated and valued for the things that I was bringing to the table, especially that I had the knowledge that other people at my same level were making so much more money than I was, right? So that's me. That's my belief system of I'm not worthy, I'm not enough, I don't deserve this. So then I got back and things were mirroring back to me, all those things. Everything I had was just a little bit less than what I needed, was just a little bit off, was just not good enough in terms of what I needed, right? And what I deserved. But I didn't really think that I deserved much. So I wasn't getting much. Fast forward to this now job that I got the double salary of. There were so many signs at that interview and at the company during the interview that had me, you know, that feeling when you feel like your stomach is clenching. And I've always had a sensitive stomach to begin with. And I would feel tension in my stomach. And when I'm nervous, I would feel it in my stomach. So I walked in and it felt like something gripped me, like in a negative way. But because they agreed to my salary demands, I thought I was queen bee. And I ignored all the signs and I took the job. And it would end up becoming the worst career choice I have ever made. The worst. It was the worst. I ended up having the most terrible experience at this job where everything I had been suppressing in terms of how I felt about myself would now come to the surface to smack me in the face. Every person I worked with, um, yeah, like, was there anybody? Okay, I'll take out most people I worked with, certainly the managers I worked with, and the day-to-day dynamic would mirror back to me my own feelings about worthless and worthlessness and not being seen and not being valued. And um, I was treated like shit. Like there's no other way to describe it. I was treated like shit. I was treated like worthless piece of garbage. And I ended up staying there for 5 years because during that time, there was a financial crisis, the crash of the marketplace, like Wall Street crashed. This was 2018, and there were no jobs. And so I would end up staying in this miserable place for 5 years. And I would end up going on maternity leave because at this point I got married. I would go on maternity leave, um, and I just didn't come back. But 5 years of like emotional and psychological abuse and just being feeling tormented throughout the 5 years. Were there highs? Yes. Were there happy moments? Yes. I would have gladly given up those peaks for more stability, for more humanity, for more compassion, for more just a fun environment. It was toxic, and I wasn't the only one receiving it. There were others, but I was probably the biggest target for the female boss that I had at the time. So at this point, I decide to go for a yoga certification program. This happened right before I got pregnant, a yoga certification program. And the yoga certification program opened me up even more. And the reason I took the yoga certification program was because I was under so much stress that I couldn't keep food down. And I ended up needing to go to the emergency room because I couldn't keep food down, like any kind of food. At first I thought, am I eating acidic things? Any kind of food, and I would be doubled over in pain. My stomach just was not digesting food. Um, and the anxiety and the stress, it was just not good for my system. Things were breaking down to get my attention. And so I thought taking a yoga certification program would help me understand the philosophy of yoga so that I can manage myself and I can manage my stress and I can find a better way to handle things. And it was a great thing that I had done because it opened my eyes to an even wider way of looking at the world, of seeing things, and I would go on to do other things like I would end up writing my first novel within a few years after that, and then my second novel, and then novellas, and then I blogged for a national women's organization. So, in some way, it showed me the beauty of the soul that is us and its journey and its necessary, sometimes hardship, in order to learn certain things. I continued to ask to be shown things. I continued to ask to um, be released of things that were hurting me, limiting me. And at this point, I'm not yet in the know of limiting beliefs. I just knew that I didn't feel good about my accomplishments. I didn't feel proud. I never looked at anything I had done with appreciation. If anything, I was looking at everything I had done to that point as struggle and hardship and on some level failing because many of the people I knew had been in the same career path for a while, and they were senior leaders at this point, and they were making so much money. And here I was making great money, but struggling, just struggling every single day. Like they were happy and they were doing their thing, and I was struggling. The person on the outside was smiling and calm, but the person on the inside was stewing, stewing all day long because I worried about what would people think, and I worried about how I came across and how I was received and their judgment and their opinions and my judgment, and then pile on the fact that I was feeling undeserving and unworthy of the things that would come to me. And I felt like I had to sacrifice to have everything. And so this mindset would lead me to having deep resentment, deep resentment about many things. It wasn't just the job, it was many things in my personal life as well that led me to be diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis in both hands. And I was in so much pain. I couldn't bend my fingers. I couldn't braid my daughter's hair. She was like 2 at the time, and it was excruciating. And the doctors, they do what they feel is best, right? They gave me steroids, they gave me anti-inflammatory medication, they gave me painkillers, but something in me felt that I did not want to take those medications. Something in me felt that that wasn't what I needed. And for my entire life, heavy medications make me feel worse than better, if that makes any sense. Like, regardless of what I'm going through, like I had at that point like a foot surgery and had my, wisdom teeth out. I do better with lightweight medication like over the counter Advil than I do with the heavy duty stuff of painkillers. And so with this diagnosis, I knew that the medication wasn't the right path for me. I needed something else. I was more open to like topical creams and that kind of stuff than popping pills. And I heard in my head, this is not the path for you. There's something else. And I said, what is it? And this is when I was introduced to the book by Louise Hay called Heal Your Life, or Heal Your Body. I think it was Heal Your Body because she has a few out. I think it was Heal Your Body. And in that book, it broke down all the diseases and tied them to the emotions that they were associated with. And arthritis, all forms of it, is resentment and anger. And I was stewing in resentment. And I'd had translated into a disease in my body. And so I decided in that moment that I am not going to be this sickly woman living on painkillers and managing life through a fog. I was not going to be her. And so in that moment, I made peace with the resentment. I forgave myself. I forgave everybody. Everybody. It was just a laundry list. If they came into my head, if I saw their face, I forgave them because I took it as a sign they're showing up for me to forgive them. I was forgiving for days. And the next week, no pain, no inflammation, no sign of arthritis, no sign, get down, my love, no sign of anything. I was pain free. I had my hands back, and I knew that there was something to this way of living and this way of doing. And so at this point now, I am wide open to diving deeper into energy, diving deeper into a different way of managing my life. Um, Theta healing and NLP and all that stuff came later for me after I had already been on this journey of self-healing and self-discovery, and there would be other medical things that would come up for me. And I was able to, through this way of forgiveness and releasing, heal internally, um, and move on. And so now I am truly in this space of um, there is a better way to navigate life, even the shittiest moments. And I've stayed in that mindset ever since. So when I became a certified theta healing instructor, it was from a space of knowing what is possible because I had lived it. It was from this space of knowing healing is available because I had lived it. Theta healing gave me even more tools in understanding what a belief system was and how it can impact your life positively or negatively. Most of the time, it's a negative one, and how it can translate into decision making, how you show up energetically, who you attract, who you marry, who you date, who you work with, who you friend, um, money. And I really appreciated this deep dive into understanding the energy behind choices and the energy behind the journey of life and understanding how to work with different energies in the universe, like angels and spirits, and to, to talk more clearly and um, articulate things in a way with this energy of the universe, with God, which I had already been doing my whole life, but this gave me a much sharper set of tools to use, which I would end up teaching to many students. And that gave me such tremendous joy because I had lived it and I had experienced the one way of doing things versus the other way of doing things. So when I started to truly release and love myself deeply, love myself for all of the choices I made, the good, the bad, the I should have known better, the um, God, if I only I didn't make that choice, right? My life started to change. When I let go of regret, my life started to change. When I embraced forgiveness, knowing it didn't mean acceptance of bad behavior, it meant detanglement from that person's energy. My life began to change because up until I started to truly release all of that, some stories from the journey of life would sometimes come back into my mind. I would replay an experience or a scenario or a conversation, and I would think, God, if I'd only done this different, or if I only had this one more opportunity with that experience or this person or in that conversation, this is how I'd show up. But you can't go back to the past, right? The past is done. It served its purpose. It offered you the lessons, the wisdom, and now you move on. And that's something I didn't realize I had been stuck in a loop with because I thought it was normal to remember things. I would think of it as remembering, reminiscing, even when it was negative. I'm just remembering how something happened so that I don't do it again. But the more you remember, the more you stay in that experience and relive it over and over again, you stay stuck in that loop of thinking, in that energy of those emotions. And so when I accepted this different way of looking at things and realized how limiting revisiting the past is, my life took a turn. And instead of me chasing the thing I wanted or fighting for the promotion, fighting for the role, fighting for the money, those things started to come to me easily. Remember, every job I had to claw my way to being seen and recognized. And sometimes that meant I had to leave to the next thing to get what I wanted. And then I would leave that thing after a while to get to something else I wanted. Because if I stayed in the place long enough, I wouldn't get what I wanted, right? I would get passed up for the promotion. I would get passed up for the raise. Everyone around me would get the recognition, but me. That was my pattern. And at the time before I got married, my pattern in relationships was attracting unavailable, emotionally unavailable men. So that was a pattern. Um, Same with friendships. I was attracting friendships that were one-sided. I was attracting friendships that mimicked back to me that I had to overperform. I had to be a people pleaser. I had to over explain. And so by releasing this way of living and thinking and holding on to things, and I felt free for the first time in ever. I felt free, and my intuition started to take shape in a healthy way and in a manageable way, where now I lean into my intuition. It is not my weakness. My emotional intelligence is one of my strengths. My ability to sense a shift in energy, to read people's energy, to understand someone's intention, to genuinely feel what somebody's going through, being an empath now is a strength. I recognize it as a strength instead of seeing it as my downfall, as seeing it as the thing that makes me different in a negative way, which is what I had felt most of my life. So in my last job in corporate, I had such a different experience than all the other jobs because I was relaxed. Not that I didn't care about the work or the people. No, I cared even more about the people and the work, but my energy wasn't performative. My energy wasn't needing to be validated and seen. And I just accepted myself in a way that I had never done before. I appreciated me and my contribution, even when no one else, sorry, gonna sneeze. Ah. I recognized my own contribution and strengths, even when no one else was doing that. And I didn't need them to. And so by not needing them to, I started to become recognized. I started to pull in the things I had craved for so many years, which is connectivity and belonging and acceptance and feeling valued and feeling cherished and all of those things. Life is not a light switch moment. My journey has not been a light switch moment. And I gave you the highlights. I didn't do the deep dives into all the shitty things and the good things and the hardship and the tears, and because you got the most important bits out of the story. But life, journeys, lessons, growth, it doesn't just happen by snapping our fingers. It takes intention and it takes a level of awareness to recognize that you're in a loop. There are patterns that you're repeating in life, in relationships, at work, and those loops are going to lead to a specific outcome. It may be different people, different situation, but the outcome is similar because it's the same loop. When you have the awareness that this is a loop, you can stop the loop. You can hop off the treadmill so that you're not continuing to go. It's like the hamster on a wheel. The hamster is going to keep going. Is he going anywhere? No, right? So it's the same thing. Like when you have awareness, you can recognize, oh, I've been here before. this person is actually mirroring back to me something I feel deep in my bones. I just don't want to voice it. And then you could change that. You could change your reality by changing how you feel and how you think about yourself. You can't control anything outside of you. And that's something else I learned. You cannot change people. You cannot change anything outside of yourself. But you're 100% changeable. And only you can change you. So when I learned those things, life bloomed for me and life became more fun and more accessible. And possibilities started to show up in places where possibility was invisible to me before. So now that I am in this chapter of leading others to their own awareness, their own awakening, their own conscious living, I find tremendous joy in seeing the light in their eyes when they recognize a pattern, a repetitive loop that they've been on, when they make different choices from conscious decision making versus autopilot decision making, when something good happens that is in full alignment with what is good for them versus staying the course because it's comfortable. I've lived it all. I know how easy it is to be comfortable. I took the job that felt so off in my body because of the money. I should have said no to that job and my life would have been so much better. I probably would have grown more spiritually somewhere else, um, versus learning through hardship. Because you could learn through hardship and you could learn with ease. And I, for some reason, my soul decided that I needed to learn everything the hard way. And I and I did. Um, so being on the other side of things, I can fully appreciate the journey that people are on. I can fully appreciate when I see somebody really trying to understand why is something happening to them and feeling stuck, feeling burnt out, feeling like they should be happy and grateful. And yet on the inside, they feel this hollowness because I was there too. And I get all of that. I get how hard it is to explain to somebody that while my life looks perfect on paper, I actually feel crappy most days. And I don't want to show up to these places that are continuing to contribute to me feeling crappy. I just don't know how to do it different. I know all of this. So if you're watching this, have some self compassion and love and patience and grace in the process. And know that there's always a different way of doing things that is easier, that is more expansive, that is joyful. But it takes awareness first to recognize what isn't working, what is a pattern, what is coming from a space of fear and a space of comfort over courage, over alignment, right? It's you got to start somewhere, and it starts with awareness. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you stick around for all the others to come. I'm really excited by this. It took me a long time to work up the courage to record this. I've been thinking about doing a podcast for a couple of years now, if not more. And timing is everything. And I'm glad that I'm here and it's happened and you're able to hear my story. And even more, I hope that you are able to see moments of inspiration for you to help you arrive at your happiest place, at your most fulfilled space, at your um, productive with balance space, productive with joy, productive with alignment, and for you to find peace too. There, nothing compares to inner peace. Inner peace evaded me for years. And now that I have it, I don't know how I lived without it for so long. So until the next episode, I will see you then. I hope you enjoyed this. Bye.